We're recording. Well, it gives me great pleasure to have a chat to a very knowledgeable lady called Patricia. She's going to introduce herself in full in a moment. I've known Patricia sort of on and off over the years, and I had the great pleasure of meeting Patricia at Contact in the Desert last year. She is a wonderful authority on ancient Egypt. So without further ado, Patricia, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Maria, and thank you for that. I'm Patricia Awyan Lehman, and I've been living in Egypt for 12 years now. It's been a crazy adventure for me. I was attracted to Egypt when I was quite young. Growing up, I used to get my dad's National Geographics and coffee table books, and I'd be rushing through them for any pictures of Egypt. It was a great recognition for me at that age. And since then, I had always been obsessed with Egypt, but I waited until, my whole life I've studied esoteric sciences. I grew up in a family that was open to discussing these things and who had a history of experiences, different types of experience, metaphysical experiences. So I studied both the metaphysical and all different kinds of sciences my entire life, and I just waited until the moment when I was called, and I knew it was that moment that I had to come to Egypt. I think I always knew I would be living here one day. And so when this happened, I found this amazing tour that was hosted by Stephen Mailer, and it was called the Star Elders Tour, and it focused on Abdel Hakim Awyan, who was my father-in-law. And the minute I read about the tour, I was attracted to it, and I ran out and bought Stephen Mailer's books, From Light into Darkness and Land of Osiris. And as I'm reading them, I could actually picture Hakim. I could see, although he had pictures of him, I could see him in his element. I could see the house that he built. I saw the village. It felt like home to me, and I just always had this knowing, and what they wrote in the book about Kemet and chematology, which is the name that they gave to describe the study that we call, we're the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, where I also have introduced Horus Rising, but chematology itself addresses what Egyptology doesn't address, what you experience when you go to the sites, and you experience it with your own senses, and you can see that there's so much more there, and Egyptology doesn't address some of these things. When you see, the incredible craftsmanship, the technology that went into creating the perfect sculptures in 3D, the symmetry, the megalithic structures, they created these things because they could. But Egyptology doesn't address it. It doesn't explain so much. And so this is what chematology addresses. And this is what, I came to Egypt to learn about, and I've made it my life's work since I came to live here. I came to Egypt the first time in 2005, have lived here since 2008, so going on 12 years. And I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world.
Well, it sounds like you're in the perfect place for your life, Patricia. One of the things that people ask me a lot of questions about, not just about Egypt, but like Stonehenge, is how old do you think these structures are? Because again, in the kind of orthodox timeline that we have in the UK with radiocarbon dating that can be very inaccurate anyway, they have the number one date, which is 2500 BC. No matter where you go, it could be anywhere in the ancient world, and that seems to be their kind of spoon-fed date. So what do you think about dating and ancient structures?
Well, I have a really interesting take on it. I don't think that we try to perceive history with our present perception of reality, our current understanding of reality. And I don't think, because, the basis of my research and what I'm studying, what Hakim talked about was that consciousness itself migrates through cycles of evolving and devolving perceptions of reality. And if we look at ourselves today, he would say that we are in the age of Amun, or meaning the hidden, we're in the lowest, densest stage of perception. And so we look at everything, we think we are our bodies. We see everything as form and matter. But what if we look at history as a series of moving into and out of form and matter? And then why, our science today only looks at the matter, the objects. It doesn't look for that space in between. It looks for layers of earth to determine how many years. And I'm thinking we're missing the point. And Hakeem talked about this as well. We have to look for the proportions, the patterns of the layers, not necessarily the density or the counting. It's so hard to explain. Counting the cycles of the layers makes more sense to me, or the patterns of the layers. And so when I look at ancient Egypt, in understanding its perception, actually, we gain more senses. Hakeem said at one point we had 360 senses. Can you imagine full sensibility? Can you imagine your ability to create by manipulating energy? Because you can sense it, you can feel the currents, and therefore you can manipulate and master the currents. You can harness them to create. And I think they created these amazing things that we would have trouble creating today because they could. It was easy for them. It would be very hard for us because of the density of our perception, if that makes, I know it's not making a whole lot of sense. I understand it. So looking at it life that way, we have to find the pattern of the cycle of consciousness. How far back does that go? And does it cycle within cycles within cycles? So I'm going to say that maybe 12 to 10,000 years ago, we might have built all these megalithic structures. Or maybe it was the previous cycle. So, if we look at it that way, it's we can't really put a number on it. Some people say the pyramids are 1 million years old or more. They could be. They could be 10,000 years old. They could be 30, how many cycles back? But once you understand the pattern of the cycle, you have a better understanding of the possibilities. And I actually think it's quite possible they're 10 to 12,000 years old.
Yeah, I mean, that's very beautiful, actually. It's very much, I think, how people really do want to work with the sites these days through consciousness, through understanding energy, rather than just trying to figure out how do you get that put up. I mean, that's very interesting in its own right. And that is all about the ancient technology as well. But I think, with going to a place and interacting with it, and because as we know, ancient sites can put us in that altered state of consciousness anyway, that kind of opens us up to some regard to be receptive to the spirit of place, the energy of place.
Absolutely. And that's the excitement of being here in Egypt and being able to visit the temples and the structures and the sites as often as I get to go. And it's not just here, it's all over the world. I've been to Peru, I've been to sites all over the world, and it seems from certain time periods that we perceive, again, I don't know how far back, but we go into these structures, and getting back to Egypt, and they're laid out in sacred geometric patterns. And they're foundational, the foundation is like the seed of creation. And so they're built to grow into living structures that are interacting with you. And so the rocks and the minerals, everything that they're using, they're creating and putting it, manipulating again in such a way as to create a perfection, like the quality of perfection of a living, breathing structure that is interacting with you. And they use the alignment of the stars to activate certain, the cycles of the alignments of the stars will activate certain things within you. And again, each one of these structures, and Hakeem said this, is tuned to a different frequency. And each one of these frequencies is like one of the 360 senses that we once had. These, of course, are called the netters. And then we call them netters or neteru here, natures, based on the hieroglyphs, and are the letters for the hieroglyphs NTR, which is why we say netters. The Romans called it natures, basically, or netter, which became our word nature. And of course, they are, it's where our word eternal and natural comes from. The netters are forces of nature. So they're manipulating the forces of nature, the gods, the natures, you know, to create this incredible structure. And again, each one would, you know, all of them within every structure, but each one beating to the frequency of a particular netter. And so you would go to this particular structure to awaken that particular sense within yourself. And just an incredible, beautiful, and this is why you have pilgrimages of initiation, because you would go to each structure to awaken that particular spot as you're moving up your own pattern of awakening.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And well, that's what I really do love about going to the ancient sites. It's, you know, tuning into their frequencies, because in sort of Taoist terms, you have different color frequencies of the sun, you have different color frequencies of the earth that are slightly different. And the idea is, you know, that the ancients were fully aware of the sun and the moon as well, obviously, and the celestial field that we live in. And bringing all of that together, you know, creates that force of nature. So, you know, you can have, that's what I love about certain ancient sites. They do kind of have a concentration of a particular type of energy. Then you could go to another site and you can feel that on another level. I mean, I know when I went to Egypt for the first time, Patricia, and we were going around a temple just off the Nile, Komombo temple, you know, it was really nice, and it was sunset there. And I felt, you know, connected to the place, and got back onto the boat. And that evening I woke up bolt upright, like somebody had got hold of my spine and kind of went like this. And the next minute I had the most incredible Kundalini rising experience. It was like electricity from my feet coming up through my body to the top of my head. It was quite loud and quite frightening, actually. Yeah, because I was, you know, just completely stunned. And then it kind of came back down, and then everything seemed to go back to normal. But at the same time as it kind of was coming up towards my throat and my heart chakra, I was showing good and bad. Yeah, and the allurement of both, and both were kind of sexy and inviting and magnetic as well. And then obviously, you know, I went for the light, but I saw an aspect of the dark as well that I'd never seen. And in a way, it was like a big obsidian, a piece of crystal that I was kind of looking at, if that makes any sense at all. So after that, I just thought, Egypt has given me something, and I felt so blessed, and I left Egypt a different Maria than when I went.
Ah, that's such a familiar story. The part of the transformation, your experience is really profound, and many people actually. Have I ever talked to you about Kamambo and the well?
No, Patricia. So let's begin.
Well, it's quite interesting. This Kamambo is a site of great initiation, and it's really powerful spot, and it's dedicated, as you know, to Sobek and Horus, the two aspects, the two netters, the only temple really that we visit on most of our journeys that are dedicated to two different netters. And Sobek is the crocodile, and Hakim would always say digestion. He would just look at you if you said Sobek, and he'd say digestion. And what he was talking about, but what he was talking about is the digestion of fear and anger, that which holds us back from moving up, from awakening, basically, from raising our levels of awareness. This was the major blockage. And Egypt speaks to this, ancient Kemet, they speak to this everywhere, that our major block in life is our fear, which, you know, we're seeing in our current atmosphere right now. It will hold you back, it'll grip you, it'll prevent you from moving forward. And at Kamambo, I can speak to two different places of initiation. And one of them, and you spoke about the darkness at that moment. And the one is, we call it the birthing chamber. And it's a place, there's actually a little niche that's right between the two holies of the holy of holies of the two different netters. And in between, there's an underground channel. You might have seen it or had it pointed out.
Definitely.
And part of that initiation is if you go down, and they have it locked today, but at one time we've been able to open it several different times, but you can go down. If you open the one channel, you actually enter it, and it gets narrower and narrower and very dark. And you get to the point where you get scared because you're only in the darkness. You can't see the light yet. And then as you finally go through, you come up. And people that have gone through this say they feel like they're actually being reborn again. And when you would do this in the ancient times, you would have the priest or the alchemist, basically the ones that know, would be in the niche toning that spark of light that would give you that moment of reawakening. Just an incredible rebirthing experience. And what's even more powerful is they have a well there. It's one of the ancient, they call it the nilometer, which the priests would use to see as the levels of the water rose during the floods. They would have an idea of how much to tax the masses, because they'd know how much the harvest would be. One way of looking at it. But in truth, this ancient well was, you can see, if you look down, it's beautiful. The steps spiral down into the darkness of the water, which would have been there. It's not there now. Which, as you're going down and under the water, there would have been openings to a channel that would take you back out to the Nile. This is what I've been told. Or possibly somewhere else. But the idea is the crocodiles were under the water. And of course, you would go up, and the priest would take you when you were ready at that stage in your development, and you would be told to jump in the water, dive through the crocodiles, and find the way out. And somehow, while doing that, you overcome your fear. And it's funny because so many people that I've taken on tours have actually had dreams about this experience before we get to the site, and have shared whether they made it or not, which we won't talk about now. But how profound the experience was. But quickly, I'll tell you, I had two very interesting experiences with two people on one tour. I had a group of very powerful women. And one of the women, while we were at the well, said, "Oh, I have a memory of being here." And she said she would come and the priest would take her, and it was her job to feed the crocodiles. And of course, Hakeem had told me the crocodiles, you only feed them at certain times, and then they don't eat anymore. So part of the idea of being safe is, you know, that they're not gonna, they're not gonna harm you. One thing, that's the observance. But there are other things that you recognize in the behavior of the crocodiles. She knew that they never dove down. So she knew that once she got deep down beneath them, she was safe. And so this was what she did. As in her memory, she said, "I remember diving down through them, and I found the opening." And she said, I pushed open the stone in front of it, and I climbed all the way out. And she was back at the light of day, and the priests were there to welcome her into the priesthood. But another woman that was on the tour, she came from a Shinto tradition, a very ancient one. And she said, "Patricia," this was later on the boat. She didn't want to say anything in front of anyone. She said, "I have a different memory." She said, "I have a memory of something similar," but she said, "When I got below the crocodiles, I saw the first opening," and she said, "Something told me I had to go deeper into the darkness." And she went further down, and she said she found another opening, and she made her way through it. There was no light. She made her way through this tunnel and found herself in another room. And there waiting for her were the Chem priests, the ancient high priests. She went into the priesthood of the alchemists, where she was accepted. And so for me, and again, these are just two shared memories, what an interesting study into whether, we get that opportunity to meet our demons. Do we go deeper? Do we go darker into the shadow side to find our way out? Again, into the light, to awaken into higher levels of understanding this universe.
That's it. That's for some amazing insights into the ancient world and how these temple spaces were used. And I think there's been a lot of misinterpretation with some of the English sites that have massive long shafts, and they're hardly ever spoken about. Near Stonehenge, you had this huge shaft that went right the way down into the ground by about 40 feet or so, and you could kind of go down there. It's called the Wilsford Shaft. But because it's an anomaly and they don't really understand it, it's not included in any of the kind of guidebooks or anything like that. And I've always felt that was a part of initiation sites, and there's various other places like that are underground sites that you could go down into the ground and then come back up through that rebirthing, going into it and back out again. So that's by itself is quite fascinating. Another place I'm often intrigued by in ancient Egypt, Patricia, and I'm sure you are going to be a wealth of knowledge on this, is the Osirian.
Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We talked about this tour that we're doing together in March, and we will have a private visit to the Osirian, which is located at Abydos. Right behind the Seti I temple. Incredible structure with huge, up to 200-ton megalithic blocks. And this is the place, of course, where they have the flowers of life. You see several of them etched. Have you ever been able to go down into the Osirian?
Not very far. We did get to go and enter it for probably about 10 feet, and then that was it. We went back out. So it was a kind of tease in a way.
Yes, and they used to let you go down back in the day, and then they closed it and they totally restored certain parts of it. And I'm sure they're still working on more parts of it. And then they closed it to the public so that, you know, everyone could only stand over the Osirian and look down into it, not even walk down to the stairs, which was such a disappointment. And so that's why this year we finally said, okay, we're going to do a private, which means we can actually go down and have 2 full hours. Well, if we want to stay 2 full hours, but it gives us access to 2 full hours to everywhere. There's a tunneling system in the back that has beautiful drawings on it. And then to get up close, if you walk around the columns that have the flowers of life that you can see from the stairway, you actually can walk around and see there's like 6 more etched on the other side. And they're actually, you know, there's controversy because there are some that say that it was lasered on. It actually wasn't lasered on, as far as we can tell, that it was done in red ochre. And there was also a school of Pythagoras nearby. And Hakim had always said that he believed that it was probably associated with the school of Pythagoras, that it wasn't the ancient flower of life. Still ancient to us, and still, you know, fascinating to find it there. It is an ancient teaching. The flowering of life through the lotus is an ancient teaching in Egypt. But the Osirian is really amazing. Hakim said maybe 10 to 50,000 years old. And again, he said you don't age it, again, by looking back through our perception of time as years. He said, look at the layers of silt that the Nile dumped, which it dumps annually once per our perception. It's an annual flow. So again, it's a pattern of flow. He said, look for the layers of silt to determine how old it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite fascinated by the structure because it just looks so completely different to, you know, by going through Abydos. You go through the back and then suddenly there seems to be this really ancient structure. That's how it kind of struck me. And what I found really fascinating as well about it is almost like an island with those kind of channels going round, isn't it? Creating a kind of island, if you will, in the middle. And some of the reports that I've read about the pressurized water, I mean, it goes down quite some way, about sort of, you know, 40 or so feet. And then in 1925, an archaeologist called Frankfurt, he was putting a probing bar down to see how deep the waters were, and the force of the artesian pressure made it bounce back up. So it is, I mean, it's incredible. So it's really difficult to build something so you have no leaks with an artesian well. I mean, that by itself got me. I thought, wow, that's water under great pressure. That's artesian. And Also, with the site, they did 11 water samples recently to see where the water came from that would have filled the channel up, and they
Yeah.
took
Yeah.
one from a dewatering well, as you probably know, by the Seti One
Yeah.
temple, and it seems to be in itself quite an intrigue and mystery, because they couldn't do the isotopes as neatly as matched is what they had hoped.
That's also quite interesting. Yeah, have you heard of? I'm sure you have of Seti, and how she would use the water from the Osirian to heal different ailments and skin ailments. She had told us that it was quite healing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't meet her, but Hakeem did. But fascinating story, even of Seti and her connection to this temple. But again, we don't have the time to go into great detail. But amazing story of a woman who was born in London and almost died at a very young age. And when she was reborn, if you will, or when she came back to life, the doctor had declared her dead, and she actually awoke again, and all she could remember is her life in Egypt, and eventually came to live at this place, which was Abydos. But amazing structure. Abydos, the Seti One temple, some of the most beautiful art, you know, the depictions and the symbolism and the stories it tells of the ancient rituals, the ancient secret Osiris rituals that would be performed with the kings and the rulers. So some really amazing information within these structures, both of them.
And when you do have water under pressure, it does change its chemical structure a little bit. So it could be under pressure within a rock, and that changes it as well in terms of sort of water divining law. So it's seen as being very different to kind of like a well where you need a pump to get the water up. Artesia would just like a whale spout. It's got that much pressure, and that's always felt that would be healing. A healing kind of energy spring to it with and you go for like a color frequency in water divining to find out even more about it, what mineral content it's got and things like that. And when I did some water divining by the Osiris to try and figure out its frequency, it was very, very high violet frequency, which is healing water. I mean the water beneath, not what was there.
Oh, fantastic.
So yes.
Well, this will be fun then to have you there to do this with us when we go down inside. You know, my cat. All of the structures, and I'm glad you're speaking and addressing this water issue. And all of these structures have underground subterranean running water going underneath them. Every single one of these temples. And there are oftentimes that there'll be two channels of water, and you'll often, as you're walking in, see the two wells on either side, so the dual opposing energies of the two waters. And you often see them, you know, doing the purification ceremonies with the two waters. And again, all interesting, you know, incredible ways to utilize this flow of water. And then I like to speak to when the river does flood, you know, annually with the rising or the Heliacal rising with Sirius. It's huge to think that as this water is coming up, and even the Giza Plateau, underneath many channels of running water, shafts would be open over some of them to heat the water. So you'd have, that's my baby, heat the water, you know, so you'd have a channel of water running hot and a channel of water running cold, all creating this amazing ionic or supercharged atmosphere. So when the floods would come, it would almost, in a moment, awaken the structures. And this is why I can see them doing huge ceremonies during these times. But this energy that it was creating would not only enhance, you know, would be great for the human body, enhancing mind, body, and spirit, but also for agricultural purposes and for creating fields of energy for multi-purpose use. So, you know, it's amazing how they were able to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it sounds very similar. Beautiful cat. Hello. And
He's a
it's
big boy.
beautiful, beautiful. It sounds very similar to Plato's description of the metropolis, the center of Atlantis, in his description of the metropolis, where you had one hot spring and you had one cold spring, right at the heart of the Poseidon, Neptune's temple. There, they're constantly describing two different waters there. Clearly, which would probably both have a particular frequency. It will be great to meet you and Brian and Susan, and because Susan, she's an expert. Well, Brian, Forster, he's an expert. Yeah, definitely. And Susan, she brings her own as well expertise to the tour, doesn't she, Patricia?
Yeah, Susan's fantastic. She is a world-class Jurassic geologist. And her expertise in the use of the different minerals, and when we're looking at the different structures, I was just talking to a gentleman about the different coatings we found on some of the stones, and she discovered when we went into the Unis pyramid at Saqqara. Everyone calls the box inside this pyramid. This is the pyramid that has the most ancient pyramid texts, or what they call magical spells. I see them as writings that speak to moving between form and formless realms. But this box is incredible, and most people have called it basalt. And she immediately went up to it and looked closely, and she said, no, there's a coating over it. There's a gray box underneath. You know, and then you wonder, okay, was this coating modern, or was it something they used for energetic purposes? And we found other boxes. There's a box in the Serapeum that we found looks like there's a solidified liquid coating. Now, some believe this is used to polish, but maybe, and again, it could be modern. It could be something that, because we've also read about excavations where they coated things in an attempt to preserve them for some reason. Or, you know, so these are the things, and this is why we always talk about bringing experts in their fields. This is why we were so interested in bringing you along with us. And we look to anyone that has, you know, a field of expertise, because we can't, you know, in the past, we had, you know, one field, Egyptologists, looking at everything and determining what it was. And sometimes basalts were actually diorites, and granites were actually travertine or cyanite, rather. And so when you bring the experts in, you actually can build an overall picture in a much better way. And in my opinion, that's alchemy. If we don't look at something from every side, every aspect, up and down, walk around it, and with all of the different eyes that they probably had as one being back then, but because we have such a division in the way we study and research, we don't understand our world in an alchemical way any longer. So it's a long-winded way of saying, you know, this is why we love to bring everyone and people like you that know so much knowledge when it comes to divining the sites, the reasoning, you know, what's going on with the subterranean currents, and the placement, and the currents associated with form and structure, and flowing water. This is all so incredibly important, and it takes an expert to give you the insight. I think sometimes it's required. And back to Susan, yes, she has the eyes to see, you know, the different layers of stone that they use, the basalts, like the really ancient, hardest rocks. They go back, that goes back to the most, you know, ancient structures. And then as we move through time, they start to use the granites, which are a little easier to work. And then they use, you know, the sandstones and the limestones, which are incredibly easy to work. And you can see that their level of expertise obviously somehow evolves in time, just like we were speaking about with consciousness.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, I mean, it's going to be a great tour, and it's going to be in next March. So it gives everybody a time to really look forward to connecting with one another again, because we're doing this obviously in lockdown, and which you know, allows us to look forward to something. So I'm really looking forward to going back to Egypt, especially with such a professional team. I'm sure I'm going to learn an immense amount. Now, some of the other sites of Egypt, Patricia, I know that you've spent so long, you live there, you're part of Egypt now, aren't you? You really are. Do you have one that where you go to, you find something else new time and time again? Do you find that you're always kind of re-exploring a site, or how do you feel about that?
Well, people ask me what's my favorite site, and I have to say the one I'm in now. But to be totally honest, my favorite site is the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. It's truly spectacular. As you're walking in, there's this beautiful gate that you walk as you're going in toward the enclosure, or the second enclosure. You look up in this gate and you see the only place in Egypt that you see the underbelly of the winged kepper, or scarab beetle. And Hakeem had told us that this is because you're entering a place that holds the answers to all the secrets of the universe. And so, of course, this intrigued me. But you can't help, as you're walking into this structure, which it actually even feels like you're walking into a womb. It's the only temple where it's so dark inside, as you're walking in. Now, they've since my first trip to Egypt in 2005, they've actually restored that first ceiling in the hypostyle hall, that first room that you walk, huge hypostyle hall that you walk into. That ceiling has been restored. When I first saw it, it was all soot. And as they restored first one side and then the other, this incredible imagery was revealed that shows, the story, literally the story, I call it the hero's journey. The story of how we are born into form, and then we go through this journey of the sine wave, basically, of the cycles, the day and night cycles, and we finally emerge on the other side of this ceiling as the winged kepper is born from Nut. And then we go through the day cycle of the journey, and in the end, the imagery again, it's fantastic. But they show an image of 14 netters walking upstairs into the mirror, Hathor's mirror, and it's showing you that these netters, these stages, like the 14 different stages of the moon. You're actually, it's another metaphor for how, the separated aspects of self come together into the unified self, that it's all, it's a reflection of the one within the mirror. So everything that we're seeing is just a reflection, it's a, how can I say it? We're born into a separation consciousness only to come back together into unified consciousness in a breath. It's an exhale, and then it's an inhale, and then an exhale, and then an inhale again. And it's just beautiful. And that's a really simplified telling. And every place within the temple, there's the crypts. They've been opened, newly opened. And this is the exciting thing about Egypt now. They have done so much restoration and work. They've opened several more crypts. Before, we could only go down into one of the 14 crypts. Now they've opened another 3 crypts, so there's a total of 4 that we can enter. They've opened another floor that you can go at Dendera. That's all brand new. They've opened a floor, you can go now up to the 2nd floor at Philae, the Temple of Isis. But anyway, you can go into all these places, and each one holds secrets. And these are things that I talk about. You also have the Dendera Zodiac that speaks. It's interesting because the structure itself, when you go up, you're actually going up on the day side of the temple, and you're spiraling, you're springing into summer. It's like you're springing up to the 2nd level. And when you come back down again, you're actually coming down on the night side of the temple, and it's straight down. You're falling back into winter. So it's again addressing the cycles and the cycles within cycles everywhere within the structure. Just amazing.
It is. It's a beautiful place, and with the insight of the day and the night, and the interpretation you've just shared, it just adds the kind of meaning to the place. Because some people, I think, they kind of look around, and it's sometimes so big, isn't it, Egypt? Everything you're looking up and around.
Exactly.
And in a way, that's overwhelming. But to have that kind of insight into these places, rather than just the standard spoon-fed history that, you know, one is given and is expected to believe, when half the time, like you said earlier, sometimes they're just theories and models, you know, and interpretations, when, you know, I think there's something, you know, like yourself, far, far deeper going on, and it's about us interacting with the temple space.
Oh, definitely. As we mentioned earlier, the temples are embodying all of the principles themselves. And I don't even think, like you were just saying, you would notice as you're walking through the temple, you're actually walking at the highest height of the ceiling. The ceiling is always the heavens. The floor is always the earth, right? And what's in between? You know, it's the separation of heaven and earth, right? It opens up the atmosphere. And again, and this is one of the creation stories in Egypt. And as you're walking through the structure, which is, you know, as Charlotte Lubitz said, the temple of man, they're also the temple of the universe. They're the temple of the breathing. It's just the breathing force of nature that is life. And you're walking through this, and as you're walking through, the ceiling starts to come down and the floor starts to come up, and you keep going back to the end when you're in the Holy of Holies. And this is the place where everything in heaven again reaches earth. This is the strongest, most powerful part of the temple. And you don't even, you're busy looking and you don't even recognize. And as you said, it's all interacting with you. And every time you get to a doorway, you're going to enter a different level, a different field of energy. It's just incredible to be able to experience that.
I know, and that's what I really love about taking people to ancient sites is, like I said earlier, even for myself, I came back a different person, a different aspect of through that learning. And that's the beauty. And I always thank Egypt for that, you know, because it was a really big awakening, as it were. So that's what I think is great for guests to know, you know, that these beautiful, and they are beautiful. I mean, they are, some of them are just incredible. Like I can remember the first time I went into the temple and just looked at the color, the richness of the depictions, and how they were just beautifully worked. I mean, there's so much beauty there. I think, as well as high technology, there is an art and a beauty that surpasses other countries. And so that, I find that very attractive by itself.
Oh, I completely agree. It's just amazing. So, in fact, I was going to also, oh, sorry.
I was just about to say as well, you know, a lot of people really do, well, everybody knows about the Great Pyramids, you know. I mean, that's, even as children, I think by the age of, you know, at least on average of some younger, but about 8 or 9, everybody has heard about the pyramids. And I remember my own daughter, Raven, coming back from school once and saying, I've read we were reading about the pyramids today, Mum. So I love the way Egypt reaches out to everybody, even in schools. You know, it has this power to do that, by even little kids worldwide knowing about those pyramids. So I think Egypt has that, even though it doesn't sound like power, it is, because it's rippling out everywhere else and saying, this is me, this is Egypt. So the pyramids are a great fascination for many people, Patricia. So would you like to talk about the pyramids?
Oh, I always like to talk about the pyramids.
You would.
Some have described the Giza Plateau as the heartbeat of the planet. It's that origin, that place where the heart beats and vibrates out to the rest of the world. In fact, they were doing, at one point, a group was doing a drumming circle all around the planet, the globe, and they contacted me because they knew I was living right at the foot of the pyramids, and they said, can you gather a group together and join us, and you would start this whole process, because this is the heart, you know, and that this is where everything emerges. And so we did. We got the whole family together, and everybody got drums out, and they went at it. It was fantastic. But the Giza Plateau is fantastic, and it is the heart. you know, Hakeem always told us the Sphinx has an intrigue for people worldwide as well as the pyramids.
Mm.
And you know, my balcony used to look over the Sphinx. And I had coffee with her every morning. And Hakeem said this was, oh, of course, wouldn't you? It was fantastic. But I would look at her and I was always so sad because I felt that something, you know, they destroyed what was once there, that something was off. I feel that she was a great lioness. A great mother. She portrays this great creative maternal energy and the power of the mother, which is the most powerful force on the planet, the protective love of the mother, and you know, the healing and the nurturing love of the mother. You could feel this emanating from her. And Hakeem always said that she was Tefnut, and Tefnut is a lioness. She's a great lioness, and Tefnut, the name itself, means Tef, the spit of Nut, which is, of course, the Milky Way. So the spit of Nut is, wow, right there in the Giza Plateau. And so, you know, he never fully explained why she was Tefnut, and I sort of made it my, I just made it, it was so important to me to find out why he said it that I spent years just studying this. And there's so, you know, I totally have a full understanding now. We don't have time to talk about it. But the one thing I really, there's a story about Tefnut. And the story is that she gets upset that Egypt falls out of ma'at, balance, right? Perfect health, vibrancy, lushness. There's this, you know, Egypt, we know, was once lush and beautiful. And now she's dry and desolate. And the story goes that Tefnut gets upset that everything's falling out of Ma'at, that the people aren't honoring the forces of nature, the netters, the gods. See how we can misunderstand that? The forces of nature. Mm-hmm. So they're destroying the planet. Sound familiar? But in the story, Tefnut leaves. She runs to the south, to Nubia. Nubia is, Nub actually means the precious or gold. So she goes to the south, and with her, she takes the lushness, right? And so she leaves Egypt dry and desolate. Now you can look at this as an annual cycle. And so when she leaves, she takes the water, right? The floods all subside. And of course, they have their dry season. And then when the floods return, Tefnut comes back. They say Ra gets upset that everything's dry and desolate, and he sends her brother, which is Shu. He's the one you see holding up, in the composition, he's holding up the heavens, Nut, standing there. You see that in many depictions. And Thoth. And they cajole her and convince her to come back with singing baboons and dancing Nubians. You see this depicted, actually. There's a beautiful chapel at Philae. It's Hathor Chapel, where you can see the dancing and the singing. They're playing different instruments. It's really beautiful. This is the story of returning the heart back to Egypt. But does it only happen annually? Does it possibly happen in another greater cycle? Possibly a great year cycle. And so anyway, I'm looking at all this and much more, and I see a meme on Facebook, and the meme says, "Never sleep where a cat sleeps." And I'm thinking, well, that's crazy. I have cats all over my bed all the time. I grew up with at least 10 sleeping with me every night, and the dogs underneath. So I had to, you know, I looked into this further, and I found different medical websites that said, this is true. You don't sleep where cats sleep, because cats are attracted to the radiation that comes out of the earth. Yeah. And they went on to describe the geopathic stress that exists underneath the Giza Plateau. And of course, it dawns on me that what do we have here but a great sleeping or reclining, not sleeping necessarily, but reclining cat. And is there a connection? And I believe there is a connection. I believe that this, you know, and others have talked about it. In school, I was only taught that there was one equator, and it's the geographic equator. But I discovered, well, in my mind, I thought to myself, what if there is a magnetic equator? What if that's the most important equator? And I thought, you know, I looked it up, and of course I found that other people have already talked about at one time when before the Earth tilted, that there would have been a magnetic equator that would have run in a circle around the planet on a sine wave pattern. It would have gone through several major sites. that include Petra, that include Angkor Wat in Cambodia, that includes Easter Island and several other sites all around the world. Well, this started to make sense to me. And in fact, Susan and I have visited many of these sites just to see the similar patterns because they're there. It's fascinating. And what if it is, you know, you also look at what she's aligned with. She's aligned with these beautiful pyramids, right? And the pyramids, there are those that say pyramid comes from the word pyramidos, which means fire in the middle. But it also, if we look at where our prime meridian used to go, it used to run right through Giza, prime meridian, right? Well, what is the prime meridian? And so I'm looking at this great crossing point of possibly two very powerful lines. They've since, of course, moved the prime meridian, which, you know, is just a line of demarcation. But is it also projecting the line, which is the land of Osiris, that is in a cross point with this ancient magnetic equator? I'm just playing with you now. But anyway, so they move it, and it ran through Paraisus, and then they move it to where it is in Greenwich today. But at one time, it did run through Giza. And it does run, the pyramids run in a perpendicular or a vertical, as opposed to the east to west direction of the Sphinx. But again, I'm looking at what's happening with this ancient magnetic line. And Susan and I looked at this. Is it possible, you know, I looked at where magnetic equator is today. Today it exists, it's down just around Ethiopia and south. Ethiopia is part of ancient Nubia, right? It's down there, and it's literally all over the place. It's a mess, it's chaotic, it's crazy. But where are we at today? We're chaotic, we're a mess, it's crazy. Well, did this ancient magnetic equator take a path? Did it migrate down a path down the Nile to where it is today? And will it possibly be restored again to its perfection that would have maybe equaled the path of the sun on the ecliptic when the earth was in balance, in Ma'at, and Egypt was lush and beautiful?
I mean, I think that's the thing that we can as well look to the ancient past and realize, you know, how connected they were to nature, the forces of nature, you know, personified in different countries by different forces, but it's always the force of nature, whether that's Thor's hammer or, you know, a huge force of nature, and to bring us back into some kind of balance. Because look at where we are now, you know, within a lockdown. So I always feel that we can draw so much emotional intelligence, and wisdom and esoteric knowledge from these ancient places. And sometimes I really do feel they impart that to us. So we learn from the ancient site experience, and sometimes, you know, it does give us an insight and access to sometimes ancient and deep wisdom, which clearly you're so in touch with living in Egypt and being a part of Egypt's breath and heartbeat.
Well, it is what all of that you're explaining and more. When you understand that it was the forces of nature, as you say, and then you start to study the forces of nature and how they've changed over time and how they continue to cycle back again. You know, just like everyone's talking about climate change today. It's not new. There's nothing new under the sun. This happens over and over and over again. And again, is it about finally learning and discerning the patterns to understand how, again, to manipulate the energy, how to learn to manipulate it in such a way that we can structure the shape and angle and form around us into harmonic resonant environments where we can live in a peace and a lush and gorgeous, beautiful environment. I think if we study the ancients, we can learn the tools again, and there are sciences doing this today. Your work much of your work is providing tools for doing this. And sadly, and even agriculturally, I see things, something else that I've been looking at deeply is ancient agricultural techniques, how they were able to build, grow beautiful, amazing harvests through the use of, paramagnetic minerals and different structures, again, to harness and create energetic fields to enhance the path of the seed.
That's what I've looked into. I really do want to share that with you in Egypt about the agricultural insight I've had. I studied this year agricultural ways of the transitional period just after the climate change, which for us here was in the late Bronze Age. But despite going through the climatic change, farming techniques did have to change. They adapted very quickly. And as it was recorded by the ancient Greeks, we provided 2 harvests a year to Greece. We were exporting an awful lot. How? So I've been looking into how earth energies play their roles within the farming of the where to plant, as much as kind of going on from John Burke's excellent work of seed germination and things. And I think I've had a couple of really big breakthroughs that I'm kind of piecing together the puzzle of ancient British farming ways and looking at the much wider environment. When you look at Stonehenge, we must realize now, and of course we do, that a lot of it has been ploughed away by the modern plough. If you go back, you're using a lot of LiDAR now, which is what they're doing, and then you start to look at the much bigger picture of agriculture in association with these sites. Then I think we will learn so much for our own future moving forward to feed everybody, and I think it can be done relatively cheaply for farmers as well, rather than relying on huge, big, basically money-making chemical firms.
Complete agreement with you, absolutely. So obvious to me. And yes, these are things we looked at when we were in England and Scotland and Ireland. And I'm sure Susan and I have many questions for you based on what you just told me in your own research. Incredible what they were capable of doing. And to feed, thousands, if not, millions of people back in the day when we struggled today. And I do think that, like you said, it was easy for them because, as you said, they knew where to plant, they knew how to plant in ways that didn't require chemicals and the things that we utilize today.
I mean, one great statistic through what's called looking at quotas of the ancient world from the late Bronze Age, because that was the agricultural revolution. A lot of authors get it wrong about the agricultural revolution here in the UK, but it was towards the end of the Bronze Age proper. And when we kind of looked at that, when I heard my lecturer saying a statistic as if she was just kind of running it off, it was amazing that even by the 1950s, which in England was when we kind of went from the more organic traditional ways to chemicals, okay, that was around about the 1950s. Prior to that, they could not surpass the late Bronze Age farmers' quota. And that is a kind of like fact, and I felt very excited about that, because I said that just shows, that's the evidence of how much surplus there was to literally export beyond and beyond and become very well known for that. And that was one reason, why the Romans wanted to promote most of the world, as you know, even in Egypt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think coming together on this tour next spring, and please mention your website to us, Patricia, because we're coming to a close.
Okay, we have Horus Rising, www.horusrising.com, and we have chematology.com, which is KHEMITOLOGY, chematology.com.
Well, brilliant. Well, Patricia, it's been fascinating to talk to you. I really just want to carry on for hours, just
Yeah.
being in your Egyptian company, so to speak. You are you are an inspiration to many, many people. You're certainly an inspiration to me, Patricia. I love your work in ancient Egypt, and I'm now just thinking, wow, look, having your coffee, looking at the screen. That is going to be a great memory of me talking to you. I just love that idea. You know, that's it's super. Well, so Horus Rising, people can find out about the tour there and look at the itinerary, and to go into the Osiris is, for those listening, it is so special. I haven't been very far in it, and to have this private access time, this is what this tour can do. It can get you into places, and it can give you an in-depth understanding and experience and interacting with those wonderful temples and energies. It's been lovely speaking to you, Patricia. I'm sure we'll speak again before the tour, and have a great time with you and your beautiful white cat with a big fluffy tail. It's gorgeous. Okay,
Thank you.
you take care.
Thanks, Maria. It was wonderful. Look forward to the next time.
Bye.